All right, let's get this party started, shall we? This is the advanced Google Plus history session. Thank you so much for coming. Only the hardcore make it this far, and I appreciate every single one of you. Hi, I'm Timothy. I'll be your developer advocate for the next hour, and we're going to go through a whole bunch of really interesting topics. And it's all going to center around this one big thing that we just launched recently. Now, it's an early developer preview, so it's the time for us to experiment with it and get ready for a user launch. And for those of you, and I'm going to do some recap at the beginning. I just want to get an idea of who was at the Google Plus history session this morning. All right, so about half of you. Great. So I'm going to go through this review quickly. This is the idea. Instant upload is cool. I take pictures with my phone, and they get uploaded to Google Plus. I can go back and look at them anytime that I want, and for those that I want to share, I get to choose to share them to my friends, my family, or public. Right? And it's this save privately and optionally share action that we're using for other activities on the web. And this is where you come in. You write moments into Google, and it shows up for that user in their private area. And then they can choose to share those out by making a post. And this is all about getting your content in more places. Let's take a quick look at a demo to see this in action. All right, so I am going to, let's see here. I want this window, these buttons. Here we are. So we had the opportunity to work with Last.fm to play with this API before releasing it. And they've been really great about telling us where our bugs were and testing things out. Now, if you're not familiar with Last.fm, it's a great product that allows you, they call it scrobbling. They remember the music that you play from wherever you hear it. And then they use that data to recommend additional music and concerts to you. And because of these reasons, we think it's a really good match for Google Plus history. I'll show you how it works on Last.fm here. So this is the test page that they set up with a sign-in button. I'm going to click this button, and I get a permissions dialog. Now, I'm granting Last.fm permission for two things. One, my Google Plus ID, and the ability to write into my Google Plus history. I'll go ahead and hit connect. Now, what's happening right now is it's going through the second part of the OAuth process, and Last.fm just got my credentials. So now, next thing I want to do is perform some sort of activity. So I think I'll jump over to radio. And my buddy Ade recommended a band to me just the other day, Stereo 360. Let's load that up. All right, so this is playing now. Oh, there we are. So this is the Last.fm that you're familiar with, going on there and listening to music and discovering new music. By adding Google Plus history, the next thing that we have here is I can now go over to Google Plus into this developer UI that you see. If I reload the page, there's a new moment, listened to California. And I want to sort of mention a couple things about this. First off, you see some album art there, right? And we're pulling this from the target URL, and I'm going to talk more about that in some detail in this session. You also see Last.fm's logo and the actual activity, listened to California. Now, if I click on California, it's going to take me to the song page, right? And I can download or I can listen again. So far, even before sharing, we've seen the value for the user here is this huge nostalgia thing, being able to go back to their Google Plus history and see what tracks they listened to yesterday, last week, or last month. Now, the next step is if they do want to make a post out of this, they can hover over that moment and click the share button. and they can share with their friends or their family or public using the power of circles. I'm going to share it back with add. I'll go ahead and click share, and I've created a post. Just see what that looks like. You'll notice a couple things here. First off, there's the album, and there's the attribution to Last.fm right there at the top, listened on Last.fm. And then below, of course, is the link to the song. This is Google Plus history, right? We've seen a simple OAuth process, and then the ability to share moments privately, and then optionally post them. All right. Let me go ahead and turn off that song. Very good. Cool. So that's history, and we went over all the basics in the first session, getting started with Google Plus history. In this session, I'm going to cover some advanced topics. Right? We're going to go in depth with a number of things and take a look at some extra stuff that you can do, both on mobile and using the sign-in button to do some authentication for login. Let's review the overall process, right? Is first you set up your application, and to do that, you use the API console. Next, you authorize the user using OAuth 2, and third, you write moments. These are all technologies that you're likely already familiar with, and let me just sort of get a survey there. Who's been to or knows about our API console? Great, several of you. For those of you who haven't, it's developers.google.com/console. It's how you create an application and add services to it so you can actually access our API. Who's used OAuth 2? Right, so a lot of us, and who's used our RESTful API? All based on that, super easy to do. This is what the flow looks like. You initiate the OAuth flow, and then the user gets the permissions dialog, and they say, yes, I would love to connect. And then we send the user through a client-side or a server-side flow, and then we're done. Next step is, in the background, you start writing moments. There's a write in which you send some JSON to Google identifying the activity. And then there's a fetch. And this is the point at which Google grabs the target URL, learns about it, and then knows how to display that moment in Google+. Let's look at this in some depth. This is the process, right? From start to finish, is there's an activity on Last.fm, listening to this radio station, in particular, the song, with the result all the way on the other side of having a moment in Google Plus history. The first step, as I mentioned, is writing that activity. And this is the list of activities that you can write. We want help on this, and right, this is one of the reasons we've got a developer preview, is that here's a list of verbs, right, of activities on your site that we think are going to be common and you're going to want to write into Google+. But there's going to be others. Yeah? And for the time being, you can use one of the generic verbs, such as add activity. When something else doesn't fit, add activity is a good one. For all sorts of creations, create activity is a good one. Right? But if you can be specific, like a purchase, use the buy activity. And if there's an activity that you think is going to be common but is not on this list, let us know. We have an issue tracker that's linked off the documentation. And the activity looks like this. You have a type and a target. All right, this is the first one we're going to look at. This is a listen activity. The type is the activity that was performed, in this case, listen activity, and the target is the item that it was performed on. In this case, it's a song. Here's a comment activity, and I'm going to add a new section here. We have the type and the target as before, but now we also have a result. And this is because I've written a comment, yeah? And now a comment exists out in the world. It's a result of the activity. So that result will include the type, right? In this case, a comment, the permalink to that comment, and then the text of the comment. Now, these fields are going to differ depending on what you're creating, and we have a reference for that in the documentation. And that's sort of the difference between these two kinds of activities. There's those that have a result and those that don't have a result. All right, after you write the activity, there's a fetch step, which is how we get the information to render these, the moment and a post if a user makes it. Now, who's familiar with this process for when users just share on Google+, how we construct this using schema.org? Right, so a handful of us. For the rest of you, the way this works is that you mark up your page indicating what you want to be displayed for these, and then we respect that. Use schema.org markup to do so, and it looks like this. Now this is a music recording, and you'll see up at the top we have item scope and item type, and then we have item props, name, description, image, and then we have a sub-item type below that. Now this is microdata markup. It's in the HTML5 spec. Schema.org uses that spec with its own activity types and property names. Let's take a look at another one here. Here's a comment activity. And this is a blog posting, right? We have item scope up there, and item props, URL, name, and description. Now, a couple key things here, and I'll reiterate these from the sort of getting started session, is that you don't have to add any new content to your site. Most of the time, all the content that you need is already in the page. You just have to mark up what's there. You have to indicate what's there. And the other thing is that this isn't visible to the user, whether you have the markup or not. So you're not changing how your page appears in a website. You're just marking it up for Google. Real quick, item scope is going to be on the parent tag, and the item type is the type of an item. All below there is where we'll look for item props that correspond to that type. And then each of these item props indicate the properties of this item. In this case, you see a URL, you see a name, and you just see a description. Okay, let's take a look at some of these in practice, shall we? All right, so this is our Google Plus History API starter, and it does some pretty cool things. Once I sign in, it gives me this UI that lets me write some canonical moments. All right, these are example moments, and we're hosting the target URLs on our documentation site. So let's just write some of these. How about a buy activity, a comment activity, and a check-in activity? I'll go over to my Google Plus History and reload, and there we have them. So here's the buy activity and the comment activity. Let's see if the check-in activity will show up, and there's the check-in activity. Now you'll notice each of these has, it's a rich moment. We can tell by looking at it what it is. Let's click through to one of these, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Right? Very simple page. You can see us on our documentation site, and if you want, you can, let's see if I could do this on this keyboard. There we are. You can take a look at the source, and you'll see the schema.org markup right there in the page. Right? This is a great opportunity to look at all the activity types that we have, find the ones that you're going to use, and look up how we actually communicate these and how we mark them up. And one other thing to note down here, right, is that so that you see the markup, as far as the payload, what you send, it's actually printed down here in this box. So you'll see sending moment, and there's the buy activity right there with the target URL. So start to finish, you can see the code for some of these canonical moments. All right, what's next? Straight to OAuth. Now, I'm going to be bouncing around a lot, right, because these are just advanced topics. There's no real order here. this is one topic I wanted to cover briefly. We put together this sign-in button also in the developer preview because we think it's a good idea to have a button that users are going to recognize on websites to sign in with Google+, but also to make it really easy to start the OAuth process. However, there's times that you're going to want to start the OAuth process your own way. And maybe you want to do this because you want to do it in flow. The user signing up to your website through your own system, and you just want to authorize at the same time. Now, to do that, you can initiate the OAuth flow like you would any other OAuth flow. It's OAuth 2. It's a standard. Yeah? And it's just this step right here at the beginning. Now, I'm going to show you some code for starting this with the JavaScript client library. And then I'll give you a brief peek at some other languages. And I use the client library because starting OAuth without a client library is much more painful. In fact, just a show of hands, who's used OAuth before? Right? And keep those hands up. Who of you have started the OAuth process manually without a client library? Okay, and keep your hands up if you enjoyed the process. Ade, you are the only one. He probably is. So the thing is like these client libraries just automate a lot of the issues for you, yeah, and just get that OAuth process standing up without too much work. And this is what it looks like in JavaScript. And you'll see really straightforward. First, we include the client library. In JavaScript, we just have to include the JS. Then we have a method that does some initialization. In this case, we're telling the Google Client Library what API we want to use and what our API key is. Next, we have a button that when you click it, we initiate the OAuth process. And all you got to do here is pass the client ID and the scope. And then finally, we authorize. Now, this is really simple for those of you that have seen the manual process versus the client library, and it's available in multiple languages, PHP and Python. In fact, we have a whole list of them. Check out the client library, and if you do it, this is the best way to do it. If you do need to do it manually, we do have documentation. Make sure to pour yourself a cup of coffee and sit down for a good read. All right, error handling. Another topic. I'm going to show you a lot of errors, right? And it can look kind of daunting, but there's only a couple that you really have to pay attention to. I want to cover them so you know the kinds of things that can go wrong, get an idea of what you might be looking out for. But again, there's only a couple that you're going to encounter commonly. They're going to occur in a couple areas. I'm going to cover first the authorization process, and then I'm going to look briefly at writing moments. For the authorization process, you can see them after initializing OAuth, and you can see them after the user has gone through the permissions dialog. So let's take the first one, right after initializing the OAuth flow or while trying to do so. You're going to see a couple different kinds of these button errors. You're going to see missing, malformed, or invalid data. Right, and this could be an invalid callback parameter, an invalid scope, or an invalid client ID. You might also see not defined or unmatching errors. Right? And I put up this list. You can look deeper at these slides later when we post them online. The other set of errors that you'll see are after the permissions dialog, when you're entering into either the client-side or the server-side flows. And this is the whole list of errors. Again, this is part of the standard. And all of these are important to have a rough idea about at the very least. But there's one that you're going to get commonly. Right? Hopefully not too commonly. This is when the user sees the permissions dialog and says no. Right? At that point, you're going to want to do something like ask them why or say please. Try again. But you do want to handle this one, right? Because you're going to handle that a little bit differently than if it's a server-side error that you need to fix, that you need manual intervention. And this is what it will look like on the client side. Now, so I've written a function here for the client-side callback. And a parameter is passed to this. I've called it event here, and I'm looking for property error. If there is an error, this will be set. If it's not an error, it just won't be set. And I'm throwing in a switch statement here. You could do an if, whatever it is. You're just looking for that access denied, asking why they don't like you, and then moving on. However, if there's no error, all you're doing is hiding the button, right? Everything worked perfectly. This should be the common case. For the server side, same set of errors. You just get to them in a different place. Instead of not setting that property on the parameter we pass the callback, we won't set the parameter on the URL if there's no errors. If there is, we will. So you need to grab that from the request. And if it's there, you handle the error. Again, same set of errors. And then we have errors here, right? We write a moment to Google, and then we fetch the target URL. And there's one that I'm going to look at, and that's a missing metadata field. So let's actually look at these in practice. No session is complete without a demo where you at least break one thing. So I purposely broke some things. This is the History API starter again, and I've got a couple versions of this doing things that are wrong. The first one is the missing client ID parameter. And you will typically see this printed out on the console, this particular error. In this case, I'm just pushing it into the browser here on the actual page. And so you'll notice two things, right? You'll see the error down here, and you'll also notice there is no button. That is as intended. The next error I wanted to show you is the malformed client ID. In this case, I put in my voice is my passport, verify me, and it didn't work. So again, it's not showing the button, and it's telling me what's going on. All right, and this one, I want to show you what happens if I disapprove. I'm going to click sign on, hit cancel, and there we are, access denied. Okay, this one is bad metadata. So let me go ahead and sign in. I actually have some canned bad metadata here. In this API starter, you can write a custom moment. We're going to paste it in right here. And this is actually pointing to a URL that we'll look at in a moment that has bad metadata. We'll go ahead and write this moment. And you'll see we get a response, missing metadata field, the name. Okay, so we've looked at the errors that come from the button, and we've looked at the errors that come from after the permissions dialog. And this is, after you do the OAuth process, you're writing moments, the errors that you get at this point. And in fact, if you have incorrect metadata, oftentimes we'll be able to give you an error message. In this particular page, it looks like this. I'm specifying a schema.org thing type, and I've got no item props. Right? Name is a required field, it's missing, and we throw an error. All right, there's a couple more topics I want to talk about. First, starting with mobile. Now, who did see the mobile session? So a few of you. I'm going to just review a little bit of mobile. It looks like we saw before, where you set up your application, you authorize the user, and you write moments. But instead of using just the API console, OAuth 2, and REST API, we're going to use these new things. In the API console, we need to specify an installed application, in this case, an Android application. I'm going to talk about Android specifically, though coming soon, this will work for iOS as well. And then you need to give it your SHA-1 fingerprint. And this is how we're able to both associate and verify the application that you are building an APK for, and the app that you've defined in the API console. It looks like this, right? Instead of choosing a web application, we're choosing an installed application, and then we're setting the package name and the SHA-1 fingerprint. Next, we want to initialize the client and the OAuth device flow, and we do that in code in the application. And finally, on Android, to submit a moment, you just fire up an intent and use that to submit a moment. Now, for more information and a look at this code, you should go to the Integrating Google Plus into Mobile Apps session. You can find that on that link. But I want to take a look at the application just to give you a brief taste of what it'll look like. So let us switch to, I think, this one. There we are. Works like a charm. So this is, I've got a couple applications here I'm going to show you. This is the first one for this section, and this is a general Google Plus SDK sample application. You can download this, set up your application, put in your SHA-1 fingerprint, compile, and run this, and it'll just work. I'm going to sign in, and it's going to ask which account that I want to use. And I'm signed in. Oh, look, it has my name. That's cool. So let's go back here, and let's just submit a couple moments. And what haven't I done yet? Let's try a listen activity. And maybe a view activity. So switching back over to here to take a look at that. Oh, that's mine. Here we are back on the computer, and you can see we've got a view activity and a listen activity coming from the mobile device. Pretty cool, right? All right, switching back to the presentation here. One more thing I want to talk about is login. I think there's a hidden gem in here for using the sign-in button, which gives you an OAuth flow for login across platforms. Right now, this is the flow that we saw earlier, where you initiate the OAuth flow, then you get the permissions dialog, and then you do client-side or server-side, and then you're done, right? But that permissions dialog, if you've already authorized, just bounces back some credentials. It's login, right? The user's already logged into the Google account, they hit that button, and you know who they are, that particular user in that particular browser. All you need to do is keep that Google Plus ID somewhere safe. And you can find that in here, right? This is the OAuth 2 response. And inside it are an access token, and token type, when it expires and created, and an ID token right there. Now the ID token, it's a web-safe base64 encoded, and it contains a few fields. I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff in here if you take a look. It's a JSON web token, if you're familiar with JOT. But there's one thing in particular that I'm going to be interested in. It's this ID. So for this example, I'm just grabbing this ID. That said, if you're actually doing this flow, you want to verify the signature. And you want to make sure that the CID there is your client ID. Right? And that's going to add that extra layer of security to know that on the round trip of that flow, what's coming back is what's actually intended for you from Google. And more information about how to do each of those steps, it's actually really straightforward, is in our documentation. But this user ID is what I'm going to use to indicate this user in my user database. Yeah? Maybe I have a local ID, which is great, and I use that on my URLs or whatever, but in that ID, I associate that with their Google Plus ID. So when they hit this button, I learned that I hit my user database from my website, said, this is the person I know from Google+, and then I get back my local user ID and all their information. And I can do that just as easily on the website as I can from mobile. So we're going to look at it first on web, just a demo of how this works, and then we're going to look at it on mobile. And of course, I'll make this source available for you later. All right, so first with the web. One of these browsers. Here we are. So I threw together this really quick web page that first asked me to sign in with Google+, which I'm going to do, and then allows me to set a quote. Prove life through science and art. Cool. And I'm going to submit that. Really simple. What's happening here behind the scenes is I hit that sign in button, I get the user's ID, and then the user sets a quote, and I send that to my user database to both the ID and the quote. And it's associating the ID and the quote. Now I'm going to go over to mobile here. And load up my application. So this is, I actually took the starter app, pulled out all the stuff, right? Kept the sign-in and a call to my sort of customize API where I send the user ID and I get back a quote. I hope it works. I'm going to sign in again with Captain Timothy. Oop. We got that, signed in, and there's my quote, right? Really straightforward, end-to-end. This demo would take you about an hour to build by just pulling down the starter apps and pushing the data out. Maybe a few more minutes if you have to sort of build a little custom API that I did for the quote. Okay, so we've covered a lot of topics, right? We've talked all the way through sort of an overview or review of the flow of Google+ history, through to activities in depth. And we've also covered errors, OAuth, and mobile. And finally, we looked at using it for login. So you can see, at the end of the day, there's a lot to this API. But remember, the intention here is to allow the user to communicate online better. Yeah? By giving them the capability to save moments privately to their Google+ history, and then to optionally share them with whom they want. Thank you. Let's do questions. Oh, and I have stickers to give away. It's the end of the day. I need to give them all away. So maybe I'll do that right after. But those who ask questions get more, which is good because Gerwin always needs more stickers.
So actually, just a short question first. Is this Last.fm functionality available to those who signed up for the preview? Because I checked the Last.fm page and I didn't find the settings.
It is not.
It is
so
not.
In this developer preview, you're developing your own application. Okay. You're not testing other companies' applications. That said, if you want developers in your team to test your own application, you can do that, and you can grant them access. But there's two things restricting. One, Last.fm just gave me the password. And two is that there's an API restriction, right? So you're only going to be able to make 1,000 queries per day. And it's not quite enough to open it up to anybody. It's really, truly just a developer preview.
And the second question was, how about moments for Google+ pages as opposed to profiles? Because I think that's going to be an interesting use case, especially since you have the possibility to display the moments on your profile or on your Plus page on this new tab. So that, I think that would be an interesting addition for some pages, because they could have some newsfeed where they just have some items in, or they have some favorites which they want to show so they don't get lost in the stream. But I guess that's the problem with the OAuth workflow, because that's the same with Hangout apps which you can't use because of the OAuth workflow. But I think that's something that's going to be interesting.
Cool.
I'm curious, because I think about the
Yeah, but it's like
Will, for everybody out there in the internet, Will asked for an example. He used many more words, but he asked for an example.
Yeah, so my point is you have those, you could use the tool to make like favorites of different stuff and just share those favorites in your Moments tab. And
I think I hear what Gerwin's asking for is for pages also to have the ability to share, or to sort of collect moments and then share them specifically. And let's talk more about this afterwards. Thank you for the feedback. Any other questions? Oh, over here.
Is it possible to embed like HTML in the like result field so that besides like the link to the page that you could put other links in the description part of the schema markup that goes at the bottom half of the share?
I do not believe so, but I'm not 100% sure about that. So
Okay.
ask that on the discussion forum and we can dig into that.
Okay.
So far we've been looking at it. Most of the time we've wanted to just sort of keep that plain text. So it hasn't come up, but I would love to dig more deeply into your...
Right, so one use case is plussing the profiles of other Google Plus users. So from a Hangout that you did some activity, you could post that to your history, but be able to tag the other people that were in that Hangout with you, which you can do through the profile link markup. So.
Okay, cool. Thanks for the feedback. Ooh, more questions. Love this.
Hi, I was wondering, will you possibly in the future open access to the history to developers? For example, as a use case, I don't know if other third parties do it or Google does this. Like, for example, a couple of years from now, like send up snippets of like what you might have done like this day, or the most important stuff you did this day 5 years ago, or the photos you took, or the events you attended. So I don't know if this could be handled by Google or third parties with access to the history API.
So what you're asking for is sort of read access to moments that have been written.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for the feedback.
Oh, just me. Is there a way to undo the moment, i.e. delete the moment which was accidentally created?
That's a great question. So if you, and we'll cover this in more detail in the documentation, right now you can update it, but there's no way to fully remove a moment once it's been written.
And by updating, you just update the content on the URL,
Correct.
right? And effectively, it will just pull the new data.
Also, users can delete their moments, right? So whereas the site will just write moments, the user can actually go into the UI and right by that share button that you saw under the triangle, you can click that and delete the moment.
So what if the site creates 1,000 moments?
You could delete all of them. Yeah, I'm sorry. David's like feeding me answers here, but it's so you can. There is an option to delete all the moments from a certain source.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I was like, you could just what? I'm not the only one with caffeine, am I? Or yes.
So for moments right now, they're being treated as individual moments that belong to a particular user, and therefore that user allows them to go public, basically. But for a Hangout, a moment could involve several different people. I know that's not really handled right now, but if you're in a Hangout with 5 other people, you're playing a game, and you want to have a moment in that game, I've kind of had this conversation with a few people, and it's a lot of the first issue that's brought up is that there's a bit of a privacy issue there because you're sharing a moment that isn't just your moment. You're sharing other people's involvement in that moment. Mm-hmm. Is there any thought around whether you should just be allowed to do that, or whether you will have some sort of process where everybody can vet it or check it, to sort of approve it, or if you can approve it going in? Yeah. I recognize that my face will be used and blah, 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 kind of.
That's a great question, and actually David Glazer has just stood up to a microphone, so of course I'll defer to him.
Yeah, I mostly want to say that is a great question. We have talked about exactly that, and we don't have the full answer. So as you are working through what could you do with the History API, get those conversations going in the forum. We like that idea. But we also recognize there's the challenges you introduced, because there's a ton of power in how personal history is, right? And how private and how much I as a user know that this is mine. So I expect users will have the kind of relationship with their history that that they would have with a private diary or a private journal, where it would feel really wrong for someone else to have written into it. So whatever, but at the same time, many of the most important moments in my life are shared moments, right? A lot of the important things I do with other people I care about. So there is an answer here.
Social medium, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, so we're looking for the right answer. One of our metaphors that we're trying to ride on is how you can tag people in photos, and we're trying to see if that works. Mm-hmm. Because I take a picture that has 4 of us in it, and I tag them, and there's flows there. So really my answer is keep this conversation going, work through it, think through specific cases and say, boy, could I do this? The person who asked earlier about putting a profile markup in a moment was really getting at the same use case. We think it's an interesting use case.
We work together.
And to reiterate that, thank you very much, David, is the discussion forum is linked from our documentation, right? We're very active in there, and it is an early developer preview. This is just the right time to really be raising a lot of these tough questions and trying to push this product forward.
This is a little bit an extension to this, because what do we want to share? Here, I understand that sometimes you want these moments to be private, but I listen to some music, maybe my friends or my circles. Mm-hmm. So maybe I want to listen to the same music that other in my circle listens to.
Yeah, so
this is
it's a great use case, and what you can do now today, and play around with this in the developer UI and the product, you'll be able to set some moments from some sources as visible on your Moments tab, right? So it's not creating a post and like sending them to everybody, but maybe you want your listens on Last.fm visible to your music friends.
But I have to do this manually, right?
You as the user would make the choice.
Okay. Also, now it's a developer preview. I understand that you don't have any dates, but I'm very excited on using this, and we have cases where we want to do this right now, actually.
Cool.
But release dates?
We don't have any dates right now.
No, nothing. A year.
We don't have any dates right now. But thank you, and please do get started.
We will.
Well,
right.
And keep beating us up until we launch. I also work on history, and I mean, it's a preview partly because we think we need to build more stuff, and partly because we want to get developers actually putting content in there, so when we can open up, there's more stuff. But when you really feel like it's good enough and we're just being dumb by not opening it up, as opposed to it's a good thing for all of us that we're continuing to work on it, make sure you say that loud and clear, because that will obviously influence our choice. I mean, this is one of those things we could hold longer or less long, and there's trade-offs, so it's good to have input on that.
Now I can say for the quality of the API, if it works and everything, but from overview, it looks good for me. Of course, I don't have all the details in the UI.
We hear that. Thank you.
Cool.
Great.
Well, and things like not knowing what to do with the social stuff, those are the kinds of things we have to gnarl on and say, is that something we need to figure out before we open it up, or can we just add that later, or, and we really don't know right now.
Cool. Thank you for the question, and thank you, Joseph. We got a couple more. Hi, John.
So maybe you covered this morning, but do the different moments, you have the different types, the listen and watch type events, do they have different meaning within the Google Plus application context? Do they do something different on the page?
So right now you'll notice that the moments look a little bit different, mostly on how we sort of phrase what happened, right? And there could be more that we could do there, right? But right now, you'll just sort of see that differ a little bit.
Okay. So one...
And again, I guess the key difference is sort of how we display it.
Yeah. So one issue that comes up with these, I don't want to say these types of systems, I don't want to sandbox it, but are you planning for more types of moments if they have that special meaning, if there's something more to them? Planning for more types, and if so, is there a process to suggest types, vet types?
Yeah, we would love to know what types should be added. And we have an issue tracker set up on our documentation. Go to that issue tracker, say I want this type, and why.
So the API at present doesn't look like it's well structured to handle lots of different types. It looks like it's a very small set of well structured types. I mean, you could eventually have a lot, but it's because it's part of the call as opposed to, say, part of one of the tokens that you're passing in or something like that.
So I actually disagree. Now, what we ended up doing is we went with schema.org markup, and what we transmit in the payload at moment write time is JSONified schema.org markup, and what you mark up on the page is, again, schema.org markup. Now, if you look at schema.org, it scales very well to many, many, many types. In fact, I think you can even mark up a volcano if you want, right, with the postal address and everything.
You could definitely mark it up, but your actual API list has the name of the moment in it, like a buy moment or a listen moment. That's
so. But how you encode that is the URI specifying that particular type.
Okay.
Right. So right now, those are the only ones that we accept, and most of those have schema.org URLs. But as we accept more, we can probably just pick that URL from schema.org, right? And if necessary, we can talk about like adding in new types of schema.org, and also like we can cover generic types. So if it's not on the list and we don't add it in later, you can try and fit it under, say, add activity or view activity or create activity, which all can sort of cover several very more specific types
So
of
that
actions.
issue of overlap is also the last thing I was going to bring up,
Yeah.
which is as you add those things, and even with what you've got now, there's often overlap issues where people might disagree as to what type of moment it is.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm sensing that you guys are aware of these issues, but it doesn't sound like you've worked through them very much yet.
Well, I mean, we're still in early developer preview. I'll stop there, actually. It looks like David is itching to add something in here as well.
Yeah, just that you're right. We haven't worked them through
Yeah.
all the way, which is why we started with we picked a vocabulary to start with that we wanted to be big enough to get the idea across of, hey, we're going for different kinds, and we have the ability to do different types of rendering and different types of metadata, but no bigger than to get the idea across. So, as Timothy said, there is a link in the documentation. Specifically, it's right under the list of 9 moments. It says submit a request for a new type. Because we want to look at that. And I've had a couple of good hallway conversations about this. There's a tension between the complete open-ended possibility, where you get each individual action gets to be as well defined as you want, but you lose the ability to sort of cluster and categorize and think about my life in organized chunks. Yeah. Or too constrained, where everything gets fit into a one-size-fits-all, the equivalent of add thing, which is not very useful. So we want to look at the specific requests that you have saying, I want a verb that does this, because in my application, it would be a perfect fit for. We want to look at a set of those. And this is just my gut. My gut is we have 9 right now. At launch, we should have 2 to 3 times that. Okay. That's my gut. Not 10, but not just a couple more. Sure. But I could be off by a factor or 2 there.
Okay.
Cool.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Any final questions? Well, okay, check out that URL if you want to take a look at the other sessions, either the Getting Started or the Code Lab, which we'll be doing in a room a few doors down tomorrow morning. Thank you so much.